Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlight Series. Today we will be focusing our attention on Benchmark 2.10, in which we will explain the process for citizens to address a state or local problem by researching public policy alternatives, identifying appropriate government agencies to address the issue, and determining a course of action. In Part 2, we will analyze public policy alternatives to resolve local and state problems. Why do we identify alternatives to resolve local and state problems, and what are the public policy alternatives to resolve them? First, let's ask ourselves why identify alternatives to resolve local and state problems. Well, what you see on the front of the screen is a Rubik's Cube. A Rubik's Cube is a toy that a lot of people like because it engages the brain in ways that really challenge people to be thinking about, how do I solve this Rubik's Cube? To solve the Rubik's Cube, only one color can appear. Only one color can appear on any one side of the 6 sides of the Rubik's Cube. So this means that the person needs to turn the sides, whether the sides be vertical or going from the top and bottom, going from the middle, whether the middle is horizontal or vertical. There's all kinds of ways to twist the Rubik's Cube to finally get to the point where there's only blue on one side, green on one side, yellow on one side, etc., or to just toss it away because it's too frustrating. But the reason that this image is here, is to reinforce the idea of what it means to identify alternatives to resolve local and state problems. What happens when a person twists one side of the Rubik's Cube and might twist it 1 turn versus 2 turns versus 3 turns is that the combination of colors on at least 2 other sides of the Rubik's Cube are going to be affected. Because if I turn, for example, the vertical layer on the right side, if I turn it to the right, that means that the orange, red, and yellow that are on the left side vertical are going to now become on the top, etc. And so what this is telling us is that every time we take a turn in one direction, there are consequences for what happens. So it may be that when we're identifying local and state problems and trying to identify solutions, it may be that identifying that solution costs so much money that there must be money taken from other programs. It could very well be that a person looks at a proposed solution and says, wait a second, I'm going to lose some of my freedoms because of that proposed solution, and I don't want to lose my freedom. And so every possible solution has benefits and costs, and it's very important to examine and investigate those benefits and cost. Now we're going to be looking at a case study where we will identify public policy alternatives to resolve local and state problems. The case study focuses on tobacco use in middle schools. Now please hear me, there's 2 things going on here. One is that tobacco is being used by middle school students, which means that these people who are using tobacco do not have the legal right to buy it or to possess it. The activity is going on in schools, which means that middle school students are also in a position to buy or sell or use tobacco with other people who don't have the legal right to buy or use or sell that product. And so we've got a multifaceted problem. Early teenagers using tobacco and early teenagers using tobacco in a setting, in a school setting, where they are required by law to be, and where they are engaging and interacting with other early teens who also do not have the right, the legal right, to access, buy, or sell this product. So it's a multifaceted problem. The school board wants to create a policy that will get rid of tobacco use in schools. After all, since the activity is already illegal, then the school board might say to the local government or the state government, you need to do what you can to get tobacco use out of the hands of people who aren't allowed by law to have it. In this case, early teenagers, right? Middle school age students. That's on the state and local governments to handle that people who are too young are getting access to the tobacco. The superintendent says, let's focus on this issue in the schools. So the superintendent, school board, principals, teachers, parents, and students are all concerned, and they have an interest in solving the problem. So the superintendent, acting as the government for the schools in the county, decides to hold a meeting and invite interested citizens to suggest solutions. So the superintendent, in essence, is doing what a lot of good problem solvers do. They say, where can I begin? What powers and opportunities do I have to solve this problem? Well, the superintendent is not the governor of the state. The superintendent is not in state government, but the superintendent acts as the government for the schools. So several solutions are presented. Create a zero tolerance policy in the student code of conduct. This means that even if these students are not held accountable by law enforcement, they could be held accountable through the student code of conduct and thus be disciplined using school-based disciplinary procedures. Provide an education campaign. Educate the students about the negative effects of using tobacco, right? Try to impact public opinion on this issue. Try to get students to come to understand that using tobacco is not healthy. The school could hire security guards to patrol the campus and bathrooms where smokers are found, right? So there's a cost involved. And also that means that students are going to understand that they're going to be monitored more than they already are, particularly on campus and in bathrooms. Or do drug testing. Test the students for drugs, alcohol, and tobacco usage. So you can see why that Rubik's Cube approach was so important, because each of these four alternatives provides for a very interesting class discussion, right? What happens when you test for drugs, alcohol, and tobacco usage? What if a person has the right to use particular medicines that might show up in their blood that the school does not already know about, right? That the person has private medical information that could be revealed from a blood test or a urine test or some other kind of test. So you see where there are, once we suggest alternatives, we have to look at the consequences of those alternatives in the same way that we would look at the consequences of what happens when we turn one side or one layer of a Rubik's Cube. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? If so, please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.